Nearly 80% of the steel used to make every food can in America is imported. Tariffs just pushed the cost of that steel up by as much as 50%, and canning companies say it could add over 12% to what it costs to put food inside a can at all. You probably walked past this already. A Walmart manager pulled me aside and pointed out which 12 pantry items are already thinning out before August 15th. One of them isn't even a food. It's the can itself, and by the time you get to number 1, you'll understand why that changes everything on this list. This isn't about empty shelves. It's about the useful, affordable version of each item quietly disappearing while the shelf still looks stocked. And these 12 items are not the same kind of problem twice. Each one breaks for a completely different reason. Number 12. Canned vegetables. The vegetable aisle right now looks about as full as it's looked all year. That's the part that should worry you. Canned vegetable prices have been climbing steadily since 2020, and now packaging costs are stacking on top of that. Here's the part most people miss. It isn't the whole aisle that thins out first. It's the store brand cans, the plain label ones with the thinnest margins, because they're the first thing a manufacturer cuts when a metal surcharge lands on the invoice. Walk down that aisle next week and actually look at the shelf tags. If the name brand section looks untouched while the plain generic cans are getting sparse or missing entirely, that's not a coincidence. That's the surcharge finding its way to the cheapest product first. At home, this shows up as a small, boring failure. Rice and pasta night with nothing green to throw in, because the $2 can that used to always be there just wasn't. The fix here is not dramatic. Grab 2 or 3 plain canned vegetables on a normal trip. No hoarding, no bulk panic. Just don't assume that shelf will always look the way it looks today. And if the cheapest can in the store is already the vulnerable one, ask yourself what happens to something people buy every single morning without thinking twice about the price. Number 11. Coffee. The same bag of coffee that cost about $4 a pound in 2020 is running close to $9.50 now. That's not a rounding error. That's coffee prices climbing over 18% in the last year alone, layered on top of a price that had already been rising for years. Here's why this one sneaks up on people. Roasters lock in green bean contracts 2 to 3 months ahead, which means the price you're paying on the shelf right now doesn't even reflect what's coming. The drought that hit Brazil and Vietnam already happened. The tariff relief headlines you've seen don't undo that. What you'll notice first isn't a sold-out shelf. It's a smaller bag at the same price point, or the same bag costing $1 or $2 more than last month. Quietly, restock after restock. At home, this is the kind of shortage that doesn't wreck a meal plan. It wrecks a morning. Skipping the one ritual that makes a hard week bearable matters more than people admit. The smart move is boring. Grab an extra bag now, whole bean if you can, since it holds up longer than pre-ground. Coffee is a mood problem. The next item is a breakfast table problem, and it's one that hides behind a much bigger brand name. Number 10. Peanut butter. This is the one most people assume is untouchable, because it's just peanuts in a jar. But the company that makes Jif told its own investors, on the record, that tariffs and record-high ingredient costs are squeezing its entire product line, with new price increases already rolling out across its shelf. That's not a rumor pulled from a comment section. That's a public company saying it to shareholders. The mechanism here is different from coffee. Peanut butter shares its cost pressure with cooking oil, since both depend on the same fat and commodity markets that are already under strain. What you'll see first isn't a missing jar. It's a slightly smaller jar at the same price, sitting right where the family size used to be. And this one lands at the worst possible time, right as backpacks and lunchboxes start filling up again for the school year. A pantry with rice, beans, and pasta, but no easy protein for a sandwich, is still an incomplete pantry. Buy the family-size jar now. Unopened, it holds up long past the date on the label. Peanut butter's fat problem points straight at the ingredient behind it, the oil itself, and that one has an entirely different kind of vulnerability. Number 9. Olive oil. Almost every bottle of olive oil sitting in an American pantry already crossed a 15% tariff line before it reached the store. That's because the overwhelming majority of it comes from just 3 countries, Italy, Spain, and Greece, and all 3 are now sitting under that added tariff. This isn't a packaging story or a company statement story. It's a geography story. When almost the entire supply of something comes from one region, a single trade decision can hit the whole category at once. and there's no meaningful domestic backup at the same price point to fall back on. You won't necessarily see an empty shelf. You'll see a smaller bottle holding the same price tag it held 6 months ago. At home, the consequence is quiet but real. Without fat, stored rice, beans, and pasta, cook up thin and unsatisfying, the kind of meal that gets eaten out of necessity, not enjoyment. Keep a mid-size bottle on hand, and consider a cheaper domestic seed oil as backup, since it isn't tied to the same overseas exposure. Fat solves flavor at home. The next item solves flavor too, and it just got hit by a completely different kind of tariff, one aimed at a specific country, not a whole region. Number 8. Imported pasta. A box of Italian pasta could be facing a combined tariff north of 100% starting this year. That's not one tariff line. That's a 15% base tariff stacked with a proposed anti-dumping duty near 92% aimed specifically at major Italian pasta exporters. A combined rate close to 107% taking effect in January 2026. That's a specific legal ruling aimed at specific companies, not general inflation creeping across the board. Most people hear tariff and assume one flat number. This is a stacked penalty, and it means the imported brand many households default to without thinking is the exposed one, while domestic pasta sits right next to it largely unaffected. Watch the imported section specifically. If it's thinner than usual or priced noticeably above the domestic boxes beside it, that's the signal. At home, a stocked pantry with no easy carb base for a fast weeknight dinner is still a pantry with a hole in it. Switch bulk pasta purchases toward domestic brands now, before that ruling fully lands on shelves. But a box of pasta with nothing to put on it still isn't dinner. That's exactly where the next item comes in. Number 7. Canned tomatoes. A pantry can be stacked with rice, beans, and pasta, and still produce a flavorless, forgettable meal without this one can. USDA's own data flags processed fruits and vegetables as one of the food-at-home categories rising faster than its historical average this year, and canned tomatoes sit right in the middle of that. Here's the twist that makes this one different from everything before it. Canned tomatoes get hit twice at once from the produce cost itself, and again from the same tin plate packaging pressure sitting behind items like the vegetables at number 12. It's a double squeeze most shoppers never notice, because it's such a cheap can that nobody bothers tracking its price. Watch what happens to the plain versions specifically. If the basic diced or crushed tomatoes start thinning while the pre-seasoned meal starter jars stay fully stocked at a markup, that's the format trap playing out in real time. At home, this shows up as pasta night with dry noodles and nothing to make them worth eating. Grab a few extra plain cans while they're still cheap. They store for years. If a meal needs a flavor base just to be edible, it also needs something to make it worth finishing. That next item is the one most people assume is optional. Number 6. Sugar and sweeteners. Of every single grocery category USDA tracks for 2026, this is the one projected to rise the fastest. Faster than beef, faster than coffee, faster than anything else on the list. Sugar and sweets are forecast up close to 7% this year, with some estimates running higher, driven by both raw sugar costs and the same packaging tariffs hitting canned and tinned goods across the store. That number alone is worth remembering. But the real reason this item matters isn't the price. It's what happens when it's missing. A pantry with no honey, no syrup, no sweetener at all is a pantry people quietly stop eating from. Plain oatmeal, plain rice, canned fruit with nothing to make it appealing. Those things sit untouched in the cabinet while everyone reaches for something else instead. And stored food that goes untouched is functionally the same as food that was never bought. Watch the bottle sizes on honey and syrup. They tend to shrink before the sticker price actually moves. Keep a jar of honey on hand, since it has a shelf life that's close to permanent, along with a bag of plain sugar. Morale is what keeps people actually eating from the pantry instead of giving up on it. The next item is what keeps the entire morning meal functioning in the first place. Number 5. Powdered or shelf-stable milk. Dairy prices look calm right now, and that's exactly why this one is easy to overlook. Underneath that calm, dairy farms have been closing across parts of the country. A structural shift building quietly, while the short-term price tag says everything is fine. This is the one item on the list where the price is actually the misleading signal. Everything else on this list gets more expensive before it gets scarce. This one can get scarce while the price still looks stable because the supply problem is upstream, not on the shelf tag. Cereal, oats, and pancake mix all assume there's a milk product available to finish them. And if that assumption breaks, those boxes just sit there unused. Watch the private label and store-brand dairy section specifically. Fewer options there, even with flat pricing, is often the earlier warning sign than a price jump. Keep shelf-stable or powdered milk on hand. It doesn't need refrigeration, and it solves the exact problem a calm price tag won't warn you about. Breakfast has a supporting cast problem. Dinner has a main course problem, and it starts with the single biggest number in USDA's entire 2026 forecast. Number 4. Canned beef meals. The single biggest mover in USDA's whole grocery forecast for this year isn't a tariff line or a can. It's the cow. Beef and veal are projected up somewhere around 10 to 12% this year, driven by historically tight cattle supplies, and beef carries enough weight in the overall inflation number that it drags the whole grocery basket with it. You already feel this at the meat counter. What most people don't expect is that the canned version, chili, corned beef, stew, gets hit by the exact same pressure, plus the metal can cost stacked right on top of it. This is a slower, deeper kind of shortage than anything else on this list, because cattle herds don't rebuild in a season. This pressure existed before a single tariff headline was written, and it will outlast most of them. Watch canned chili and stew prices specifically. When they start closing the gap with fresh dinner ingredients, the just-open-a-can backup meal stops being the cheap option it always was. Buy canned beef meals on sale now, rather than waiting for cattle supply to rebuild on its own timeline. If beef is getting harder to justify even in a can, what happens to the protein everyone assumed was the safe, cheap fallback? The one that's in 90% of American kitchens right now. Number 3. Canned tuna. 2 cans sitting next to each other on the same shelf can cost 6 times more per ounce than one another, and almost nobody checks. A store-brand 4-pack runs around 19 cents an ounce. A premium single can of the same basic product runs anywhere from 57 cents to well over $1.30 an ounce, for a food more than 90% of American households already buy every single year. That gap is the twist. It has nothing to do with tariffs or cattle or commodities. It's pure math hiding in plain sight on a shelf tag. Here's what actually happens. The cheap multi-pack format disappears first, not the category itself, and shoppers who don't notice default straight into paying multiples more for what looks like the exact same can. Watch for that specifically. Single premium cans remaining while the multi-pack section empties out gives the impression that tuna is available, even while the affordable protein already vanished. At home, that shows up as sandwiches, rice bowls, and quick dinners quietly costing far more per serving, with nobody quite sure why the grocery total crept up. Buy the multi-pack format now, while it's still sitting there, instead of single cans later. Tuna is a protein problem hiding in a price tag. The next item is a flavor problem hiding behind a completely different kind of shelf trick, and it's the cheapest item on this entire list. Number 2. Bouillon and broth base. This is one of the least expensive items in the entire grocery store, and that's exactly why it's often the first thing quietly cut when a store resets its shelves. Low-margin, small-footprint items like bouillon cubes and broth concentrate get deprioritized before anything with real profit margin gets touched. That flips the assumption most people carry into this list. The expensive items aren't always the ones at risk. Sometimes the cheapest item is the most disposable one, from the store's perspective, not yours. Without a broth base, everything else on this list, the rice, the canned vegetables, the beans, cooks up thin and forgettable. It's technically a meal. It doesn't taste like one. Watch the actual number of broth and bouillon products on the shelf, not the price. Fewer options sitting there, even while everything around them looks completely normal, is the real signal. Grab a few boxes or jars now. They're inexpensive, and they last for years without any real storage effort. Every item on this list has broken for its own separate reason so far. The last one proves they were never really separate problems at all. Number 1. Canned soup. A company that makes one of the most recognizable canned soups in America has said, on the record, that steel and aluminum tariffs now account for over half of its total tariff costs for this fiscal year. That's not speculation. That's Campbell's, by name, confirming exactly the pressure sitting underneath every single can on this list. Remember that number from the very start. The U.S. imports roughly 80% of the tinplate steel used to make food cans, and tariffs are expected to add over 12% to total can-making costs. Soup depends entirely on that can. No can, no shelf-stable soup, at any price, no matter how cheap the ingredients inside it are. Here's the moment this whole list has been building toward. It was never really 12 separate food problems. It was one packaging problem wearing 12 different labels. Vegetables, tuna, tomatoes, beef, and now soup, all creeping upward at roughly the same time, for roughly the same underlying reason nobody was watching. Nobody blames the can. Everyone just blames prices in general and moves on. Buy canned meals now, before the fall contract cycle locks in the next round of can cost increases that are already being negotiated behind the scenes. Calories aren't enough without protein. Protein isn't enough without flavor. Flavor isn't enough without fat and morale holding the whole thing together. And none of it stays affordable if the container holding it becomes the expensive part of the equation, which is exactly what's happening right now, quietly, in nearly every can on every shelf in this list. Remember where this started? Almost 80% of the steel behind every can in this country is imported. Tariffs have already pushed those costs up by double digits, and one of America's biggest soup makers just confirmed it applies to their business directly. That's not 12 coincidences. That's one pattern, showing up in 12 aisles. So here's the plan. And it's not complicated. This week, grab the canned tuna multipacks and canned beef meals. Those two are already moving. One from a math trick on the shelf, one from a cattle shortage years in the making. This month, pick up coffee, peanut butter, and olive oil, since those costs are still working their way toward the shelf price you'll see later this year. And before back to school and hurricane season both ramp up around the middle of August, round out the list with canned vegetables, canned tomatoes, sugar, shelf-stable milk, broth, and canned soup, seasonal demand, and the fall can contract renewal both land right in that window. None of this requires panic. It requires noticing. The shelf can look completely normal and still be quietly failing you, one boring, affordable item at a time. Which one of these have you already noticed getting smaller, pricier, or harder to find at your own store?